Hello and welcome to the fifth. I think this is the fifth podcast I've recorded. Um, Today I've got work again. Again, today I've got to go to work, and I was planning to record this podcast after getting back from work because I'm in the same situation as I was at the beginning of the week. Today is Friday. Today is Friday. I also work on Fridays, and I'm not sure. I think it was on Tuesday at the beginning of the week when I was talking to you about being in a rush. I had, it was in the morning before work. I had to go to work, and I had had a shower. I had taken a shower, and I'd spent a bit too much time in the shower. I'd spent, I'd, I'd been too long. I was, I was too long in the shower, and so I had to rush the podcast a bit because I didn't want to be late for work, or I didn't want to rush to work. Today I'm in the same situation, but the difference is I haven't had I haven't had a shower yet. So I'm recording the podcast earlier than before, a bit earlier, but I've still got to take a shower, which it's a bit, maybe it's a bit dangerous. I'll have to rush the shower now because I don't want to be late for work, and I have to have a shower because for me, going to work and having to be there for several hours without having had a shower, I feel very uncomfortable. I feel very sticky, very dirty, and it makes the experience worse. It's much more comfortable. It's much more bearable. I can bear being at work if I feel clean and fresh after having had a shower. So, this podcast episode probably isn't going to be so long either, but I'll try to do it a bit longer, a bit more than 20 minutes, and have a shorter shower afterwards. I've got the clock in front of me again, so I'm keeping an eye on the clock. I'm keeping an eye on the time. But the reason, like I said, I was planning on recording this in the afternoon after finishing work. The reason I changed my mind and decided to record it now in the morning is because I was thinking about something, and I felt like I was in a good state of mind to talk about something. My mind was racing. There were a lot of thoughts in my mind. You know, when I finish work, when I get back home after work, probably I'll be pretty tired. And even if I have ideas, even if I know what I'd like to talk about, probably nothing will come to me. You have an idea, but you don't make connections to other ideas. You can't talk about it much because there's nothing comes to mind. And but right now, I feel like I'm a bit more energized. Lots of things are coming to mind related to this topic I wanted to talk about. So I'm going to talk about it for a bit now. It's about language acquisition, language learning, And to be honest, I'm a bit down. I'm a bit not sad. I'm a bit down. I'm a bit troubled. I I don't have much optimism. I'm not very optimistic about about language learning, language acquisition through comprehensible input at the moment. Not because I don't believe in the method. The more I do it, both as a learner, the more I learn languages through input, and the more I create these videos, the more I'm convinced that it's the only way to really properly learn a language. But the more I try to learn and the more I try to help others learning, the more I come up against, the more I come up against this problem of material, this problem of content. There just isn't enough content. There isn't sorry, there isn't enough good content. And as a learner, of course, that can get you down when you're ready to learn, when you're eager to learn, and you're convinced of this approach. You're convinced that using comprehensible input is a really good way to learn, but then you look and look and look for input, you look and look and look for content, and it's very hard to find anything. When it gets me down, it troubles me that I'm willing to spend the time each day to listen, to watch a lot of stuff in the languages I want to learn, but there just isn't enough to do it regularly for much time. And as a creator of content to help others learn English, I'm coming up against the same problem, but from a different side, from a different perspective, from the other end. I realize how hard it is to create content that's content that's good, material that's good. I'm having trouble on two fronts, like in the First World War in Europe, when after the Russian Revolution and the Russians made peace, the Bolsheviks, the communists made peace with the Germans. Then, before then, the Germans were fighting on two fronts. They were fighting in the east against the Russians, and in the west against the other, against Britain and the United States and France. They had two fronts, and then afterwards they were only fighting on one front. Right now, I feel like I'm fighting on two fronts, and on neither of them I'm going very well. Well, that's not entirely true, because I'm learning with comprehensible input. I'm learning two languages at the same time, Spanish and German. And the Spanish is going pretty well. There's a good chance that a lot of you who are listening maybe have heard of Dreaming Spanish. Dreaming Spanish is a YouTube channel, but also a website where you can find lots and lots of videos in Spanish at different levels, from super beginner to advanced. You can find lots of videos that are in Spanish that are comprehensible for beginners, but also for intermediate or advanced level learners, and that's great. There's nothing comparable for any other language. In regards to the amount of content there is for learners, and I'm actually not using Dreaming Spanish anymore. I used it for a few hundred hours, but I wanted, for various reasons, I only wanted to listen to speakers from Spain. I didn't want to listen, at least not too much, to speakers from South America. Not so much for the accent, but there's also part of its efficiency, because each time you change to another accent, you have to almost go back a level, or you have to accept a lot more trouble getting used to the accent. And I think that's much easier to do once you have a solid grasp of the language itself. I think getting used to other accents is much easier once you're at a very advanced level. So I think it's more efficient to listen lots to the speakers that sound similar, who are from a similar, from the same country, for example, from Spain, and then later on, once you have that core competence, that mastery of a specific, not of a dialect, because even within Spain there's different dialects, but once you have that mastery of the language, then you can try listening to other more difficult accents. But also there's different, like in Spanish, there's the different uses of the past tense between Spain and Latin America. And so there's various reasons, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe would be a better idea to be more open and listen to all accents. But I have a feeling I'm right, and you only find out one way, right? You only know if you're right or wrong by testing something, by testing your idea. So I want to test this idea. And it's not a problem, because there's a great podcast called Spanish with Juan, Español con Juan, and that's going to run out eventually, but there's many, many, many hours. So every day I'm listening to 1 hour of his podcast, and it's 1 hour of really good input for Spanish. So if you said I was fighting on 3 fronts, I was learning Spanish, I was learning German, and creating input in English for other people, then maybe you could say on one of those fronts, for Spanish, it's not going so bad. I'm doing pretty well. But even then, even though at the moment it's going pretty well, I still am aware of this problem. I see very clearly this problem that I will have because of the lack of good material. Because in this podcast, for example, of Spanish with Juan, the language is very it's very everyday language, which is good. You want to make sure that the input you're getting is the language people actually speak. Because if you're learning lots of strange academic words that only appear in books and no one would ever say, the language you end up with is going to be very different, very strange. It's going to be very different from the actual language that people speak and people understand. So it's good. It is everyday language. But even then, that's a very broad category. Lots of things can fit into everyday language. So what the way he speaks, what he says is very good, but it's still missing a lot. And I was thinking, for example, this is something I noticed when learning German. And sadly, at the beginning for German, I took a lot of classes. I took a lot of German classes, and I forced myself, and I was forced by others. I was pushed, encouraged by the teachers, but I also pushed myself to speak and to write very early on, because sadly that's what you do in classes. And now that I'm very convinced by comprehensible input, I think it's what you shouldn't do. You shouldn't do that. You should only, for many, many, many hours, the only thing you should do is listen. After a while, you can begin to read, but at the beginning, you should only listen. You should listen and understand. After a few hundred hours, maybe you can begin to read books, if they're easy, if there's books for you which are easy. But you should wait at least 1,000 hours before starting to speak. I think, anyway. Unless you have to. If you have to speak a little, then you have to speak. But if you don't have to speak, wait at least 1,000 hours, if not more than 1,000 hours. And if you have to speak, because maybe you live in the country where the language you're learning is spoken, maybe you need to speak the language for daily life, then only speak the little bit that you have to. Only speak as much as you have to. Anyway, I'm losing track of what I was talking about. What was I talking about? Yes. So, in English, what is everyday speech? And one thing, for example, is the word put. Put. There's no definition for the word put. Let me show you why. Because you can put the clothes on the bed. You can put the clean clothes into the wardrobe. You can put the dirty clothes into the laundry basket. You can put them into the washing machine. You can put the car into the garage. You can park the car in the garage, but very rarely would anyone say park the car in the garage. You put the car in the garage. You put the plates in the sink. You put water in a cup. You don't fill it up. Sometimes you'll say fill the cup up with water, but most of the time put some water in the cup. Put some water in a bucket. Put some soap in the water. Put your clothes on. Put your clothes on. Put your clothes on the hook. Hang them on the wall. Hang them on the hook. But you don't say hang them on the hook. Put them on the hook. So all these different physical actions, that's a huge amount of what people are saying every day when they're talking to each other. Put this, put that there, put that here. It's just this one word, put. And there are specialized words for all these different actions. You can hang the clothes on the hook. You can hang the clothes on the hook. You can lay the clothes on the bed. You can stick You can stick the clothes into something. You could for each different style of movement, there's a different word, but very rarely are those words used. When you want to be a bit precise, you use them, but most of the time, to understand, to comprehend the meaning, what the other person wants to say, put is enough. And it's not just for physical actions, it's not just for someone moving or putting something somewhere. It's for much more abstract or very different meanings. For example, like I said, you can put the car into the garage. You can drive it. You can drive the car into the garage, which is what you're doing. You have to drive it, but you don't say that. You put it there. You can put the dog into the kennel, which is a very different meaning, because unless you're physically picking up the dog and shoving it into the kennel, unless you're grabbing the dog and pushing it into the kennel, it's not you who's doing it. To put the dog into the kennel is where the dog lives. It's the little box with an entrance, the dog house. Sorry. You don't physically put the dog in the kennel. The dog itself is going into the kennel. Maybe you're guiding it. Maybe you're taking it to the kennel. But unless you're physically pushing the dog into the kennel, it's the dog putting itself into the kennel. It's the dog. Maybe it doesn't want to go into the kennel. Maybe you're forcing it, but you're not physically doing it yourself. The action involves another creature, another animal, the dog, that has its own desires, its own wishes. And maybe it does what you say, but you're not physically putting it in there. But people still say, put the dog in the kennel. Or the kids, put the kids to bed. Put the kids to bed. And for each of these actions, you could come up with much more specialized words. Like for physical actions, to lay the clothes on the bed, to stick something into a hole, to fill the cup up with water. And those have their place. But most of the time, the message is understandable with just the word put. You don't have to specify it. You don't have to make it more specific, because people understand. And when a kid grows up, when a child, before they can speak, when they're growing up, what is the language that they hear around them? What do they hear their parents saying, their mum and dad? What do they hear their family members saying? What do they hear the people around them saying? They hear them saying, put the car in the garage, put the clothes in the laundry basket, put your clothes on, put this, put that, put the dog in the kennel. And so those are the words they learn to say all of those things. And this is the importance about comprehension. There are no definitions for words. Your brain doesn't have a dictionary of words, each word with a usage or several usages. There are no usages. Words do not have usages. The reason why you can use put in all these different situations is because when you use put, people understand what you mean. Or when someone else uses put in any of these situations, you understand what they mean. And when the kid grows up and hears put being used in all these different situations around him, he learns to understand what it means. And that's the problem in the classrooms. They pretend that there's such a thing as a usage, such a thing as a definition. So instead of just understanding things, comprehending things in the language, you learn to have each of these separate words for separate usages. You learn, German in the end, maybe Germans are a bit more specific, but you can't judge that as a foreign speaker. And I learned it the hard way, sadly. After a while, I realized it's pretty much the same as English. There's a few words like put and take, for example. Put your clothes on, take your clothes off. Put the clothes on the hook, take them from the hook. And there's a few words like that in German, which are also used for all these common actions. But that's not what you learn in the beginner classes. You learn the words like lay. You learn, and you think about it. You're told to think about it. And you're told that there's certain contexts, certain usages. You're told when you have a flat surface like a bed, and you have, for example, clothes that then you lay out flat on the bed, you don't put the clothes on the bed, you lay them on the bed. I'm just going to drink some water. And I don't know, you don't if there's a sort of hole that you put something into, you don't put something in the hole, you stick it into the hole. And so your strongest association are these specialized usages which have very little to do with how people speak in everyday life. And what you end up with going to these classes is as if someone in English didn't know how to use the word put, didn't know how to use put in all its richness to describe all these different things that we do in everyday life. After these classes, you only know how to stick something somewhere. And it's an unnatural usage because you've learned to think about it. You've learned to think about a very specific context where this word stick works, a context which it matches. You've learned a very specific context where the word lay matches, where hang is used. And if you learn like that, you're going to have a lot of trouble because you don't really have command of the real language. You have a trick language. You have a trick language where you're always trying to think of the context and think of the word that matches that context. And if you learn like that, you're never going to get a natural command of the language. So, and the only way you will is by comprehending, by understanding things in that language. Because that's all that matters in the end. People say things because other people understand them. That's how the rules of the language are built up. That's how you know what to say. That's how you get used to saying certain things, because everyone understands what you mean by that. And later on, after you have a strong command of the language, then you'll pick up. You don't have to do it consciously. You don't have to work at it. You'll just pick up the more specific usages. You'll start to notice that sometimes people use the word lay. Not very often. And you'll start to notice the specific feeling for that it has a slightly different meaning, a slightly different feeling is a better word, because the meaning isn't really different, but you want to get something slightly different across. And you'll pick that up with time. But you'll pick it up, you'll learn it exactly the same way, by comprehending things, comprehending what's being said when those more specialized words are used. So you don't have to worry about it. You never have to worry about definitions or usages. You never have to think about anything, because as soon as you start to think about language, you're learning something false. You're learning something that someone's tried to come up with a rule for, but the rule is too simplistic, too narrow, too limited to really have anything to do with real language. It's a trick. And you can learn a lot of tricks and say a lot of things, but there's only so many tricks you can learn. There's only so many rules you can keep in mind at once. So if you just learn rules, if you just learn tricks, if you just learn definitions, you're going to have a very limited command of the language, and you're going to struggle a lot, because you'll always have to be thinking about what's the rule for this context. What's the trick? What's the trick to this situation? And you'll struggle. So just get those 1,000 hours. It's sometimes hard, like I said. It's hard because even though, for example, this podcast I'm listening to in Spanish is great, it's full of everyday language. It's full of things that any person on the street would say. It's full of the things that you would hear when you're talking to someone, having an interesting conversation with someone. But when you're having an interesting conversation with someone about, I don't know, about what you do for work, or about the fact that there's too many tourists, or what the tourists in this country are up to, all these interesting conversations full of everyday language, you're probably not saying, like two parents say to each other, are talking to each other when their kids are sitting around and hearing it, put the dog in the kennel, put the car in the garage, put the dirty clothes in the laundry basket. So there's lots of different types of everyday language. And from the content, from the material that's available on the internet as comprehensible input, a lot of the variety of that everyday language is missing. It's hard to find a lot of that everyday language that kids grow up listening to, that kids grow up hearing around them. And that's the big problem, because it's not easy to create content like that. It's not clear how I, for example, can make videos, many, many hours of videos, with the sort of language using the word, for example, put, like I was talking about, how I can create content like that is interesting. And that's the challenge. That's what's troubling me at the moment, because it's only worth continuing making videos, I think, if I can figure out a way to get more of that variety of everyday language into the content that I'm making. All right. As I said, I've got work, so I've got to go now. I've got to have a quick shower. I've got to rush myself in the shower, which is good, because normally my showers take way too long. So I hope today I hope the way I was speaking was rich, was full of everyday language. I hope you understood most of what I was saying, and yeah, I hope the sample of language that I'm giving you, that I'm providing you with, is the sort of language that's really going to help you just to understand the world around you in English, understand what the people around you are saying in English. All right, see ya.